Usually when we talk about a traffic jam, it's a localized annoyance. Like you're
Yeah.
on the highway, you see the brake lights flash red, and you just kind of accept that you're going to be 10 minutes late.
Right. It's frustrating, but it's contained.
Exactly.
You experience this temporary friction, but, the rest of the system generally just flows around it.
Yeah, but then you zoom out and you have to wonder, like, what happens when the highway is the entire global economy and the overturned semi-truck is just sitting right in the middle of our core energy supply?
Well, suddenly that traffic jam isn't just making you late for work.
No, it is completely rewiring how corporations operate,
Yeah.
where we physically put our computer servers and, even whether or not you're going to get your mail delivered.
Yeah, because a disruption at that foundational level, it creates this synchronized global shockwave. Every supply chain, every profit margin, every logistical network is suddenly forced to just, recalculate.
Which brings us to the core of this deep dive. I've been going through this massive stack of market briefs this week for you guys, and it's everything from global geopolitical updates to boardroom corporate minutes and even some FDA announcements.
Which can be a lot to digest.
Oh, totally. If you just read the headlines, it feels like pure disconnected chaos. But our mission today is to extract the signal from the noise for you. We are going to connect the dots. We're starting from a massive energy shock, moving into these wild boardroom scrambles for AI dominance, literally launching into space, and then, finally bringing it all back down to your health and your front door.
And when you lay all these sources out side by side, there's this single, undeniable theme that emerges.
Right.
We're looking at a world that is rapidly restructuring itself around resource scarcity and really physical limits.
Yeah.
Whether that limiting factor is a barrel of oil or the compute power of an AI chip or, even the funding to keep a postal truck running, the friction is literally everywhere.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to begin with the absolute foundation of the global economy, which is energy. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is that overturned semi-truck I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it really is.
Geopolitical tensions, specifically the Iran conflict, are acting as this catalyst for total market chaos. We saw Brent crude briefly top $119 a barrel.
Which is staggering.
It was whipsawing so fast it hit 112 intraday.
And, to understand why those specific numbers are so incredibly disruptive to the global system, we really have to look at the physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, because it's not just a concept.
Exactly. We aren't just talking about a political disagreement here. We are talking about a geographical choke point. It bottlenecks roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day.
20 million. Every single day.
Yeah. And when you layer on the fact from the briefs that Qatar's liquefied natural gas capacity has also taken physical damage.
Oh, right, the LNG facility.
You have a severe structural disruption to the absolute lifeblood of the global energy grid.
And what blew my mind going through these briefs is how limited our tools actually are to fix a physical problem of this scale. Like, governments are scrambling, right?
They are.
They're releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They're issuing Jones Act waivers.
Which is a big deal, actually.
For those who don't know, that essentially suspends this century-old law that requires U.S. ships to move cargo between U.S. ports. So they're doing that just so foreign tankers can come in and help ease the transport bottleneck.
Right, and they're looking at pipeline reroutes, too.
But it all feels like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, doesn't it? Refiners like Marathon Petroleum are incredibly exposed here.
Very exposed.
And then the International Energy Agency, the IEA, is even urging these drastic consumer demand cuts to ease the shock.
Yeah, the demand side stuff.
They're telling people to work remotely, lower their highway speed limits, reduce air travel. And I have to push back on this, just objectively looking at the numbers. Are speed limits and remote work really going to move the needle on a 20 million barrel a day bottleneck? Well, fundamentally, no.
Right.
Those are marginal demand side reductions trying to solve what is a catastrophic supply side failure. You can't just print more oil, and you can't instantly manifest new pipeline.
No, of course not.
And the market instantly recognizes that government tools are just insufficient for a physical shock of this magnitude, so it prices that reality in immediately. That is exactly why the economic fallout is so severe across the board right now.
Yeah, we are definitely seeing that slide in the data. Like, The S&P 500 just tracked a fourth weekly loss, down about 1.5%.
Yeah.
Tech leaders like NVIDIA and Tesla were down around 3%.
It's a broad sell-off.
It is.
Yeah.
And over in the UK, the FTSE 100 literally erased all of its 2026 gains. And their 10-year gilt yields, which is their equivalent of treasury bonds, they hit post-2008 highs, sitting right around 5%.
Wow.
We're even seeing emerging market funds like the EM ETF just getting crushed because these developing nations are essentially being forced into outright energy rationing. Right, because they simply cannot outbid developed nations for scarce fuel.
Exactly.
And it creates this massive domino effect. High energy costs bleed into the cost of manufacturing, the cost of transportation, and ultimately the cost of basic goods for everyone.
But, looking through these briefs, I noted a massive contradiction. Usually, when the world feels this unstable and inflation is looming, investors flee to safe havens, right?
Historically, yes.
They buy gold. They buy silver. But according to our sources, SPDR Gold shares and the iShares Silver Trust actually tumbled.
Yep.
And my theory, reading through the data, is that this all comes back to bond yields. Because gold doesn't pay you a dividend, right?
That is a highly accurate read of the situation, honestly. It all comes down to the fear of stagflation and the mechanics of interest rates.
Okay, break that down for us.
So stagflation is that really toxic, paralyzing mix of high inflation, which is being driven right now by those skyrocketing energy costs we just talked about, and stagnant economic growth.
Right, high prices, but nobody's making more money.
Exactly. So when inflation spikes because of an oil shock, the Federal Reserve is forced to keep interest rates higher for longer to try and cool down the economy. And because gold and silver don't pay a yield, they become much less attractive. When Treasury yields rise due to those higher rate expectations and the U.S. dollar strengthens, well, investors just pull their money out of precious metals.
Because they want a sure thing.
Right. They put it into bonds where they can secure a guaranteed high return.
Which brings us to the direct, everyday impact for you listening. Because those higher rates aren't just for Wall Street traders to worry about. Mortgage rates jumped to a 3-month high of about 6.53%.
That is a huge jump.
And he's citing elevated uncertainty regarding inflation, jobs, tariffs, and of course, oil. In fact, markets are now actually pricing in a higher chance of a June rate hike rather than a cut, driven purely by those stagflation fears.
And regardless of your politics, the purely economic reality of the current DC environment is that the market is just stuck in this holding pattern.
Yeah, totally stuck.
Powell noted he'll stay past mid-May if no successor is confirmed because he's awaiting the conclusion of a Department of Justice probe.
Right. And I should mention, the briefs don't take a stance on that probe. They just note it's happening.
Exactly. We're just looking at the market mechanics here. That kind of institutional limbo just adds another layer of friction to a market that is already struggling to price in these global conflicts.
So if you are a corporate executive, right, and you're staring down 6.5% mortgages that are cooling consumer spending, plus sky-high energy costs eating your supply chain margins, and a central bank that might actually raise borrowing costs even more.
You're sweating.
You're sweating. You can't just sit there. You have to aggressively restructure. And we are seeing a massive corporate reshuffle in real time in these briefs.
Yeah, the M&A activity is wild.
Take Nexstar, for example. They just completed a $6.2 billion acquisition of Tegna. They got the DOJ and FCC approvals, and they now reach about 80% of U.S. households with over 260 local TV stations.
Yeah, it's a massive footprint.
Massive. And this is despite ongoing antitrust challenges from state attorneys general and DirecTV. Now, at first glance, dropping billions of dollars on traditional local TV when debt is this expensive seems kind of counterintuitive. But looking at the numbers, I have to assume this is purely an offensive move to build leverage.
It is entirely about leverage and economies of scale.
Yeah.
But think about it. When your operating costs soar, you need unignorable distribution power. By controlling 80% of the local market, Nexstar can essentially dictate terms to advertisers and cable providers like DirecTV.
Not because they're too big to ignore.
Exactly. They consolidate the back office costs, they centralize the operations, and suddenly that really expensive debt becomes manageable because their profit margins are insulated by just sheer market dominance.
That makes perfect sense. But then on the flip side, you have companies taking the exact opposite approach, like not consolidating their core, but entirely pivoting away from massive sectors.
Right, the Unilever move.
Yes, Unilever is currently in talks to merge its foods unit with McCormick in an all-stock deal. They are heavily pivoting their entire portfolio toward beauty, personal care, and home products.
It's a huge shift.
It is. And my question is, why abandon food right when grocery bills are top of mind for everyone? I imagine this is like a margin compression issue. Food is a low-margin bloodbath with these supply chain costs, but people will always pay a premium for their specific skincare routine.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The elasticity of demand is completely different. Food is hypersensitive to raw material inflation. If the cost of tomatoes skyrockets because, say, diesel fuel to transport them is expensive, and you raise the price of your ketchup,
Consumers are just going to buy the generic brand.
exactly, they will quickly downgrade it to a cheaper store brand. But beauty and personal care products have significantly higher profit margins and intense brand loyalty.
That's true. You don't mess with someone's face cream.
Right. A consumer is much less likely to compromise on a facial moisturizer they use every single day. So by pivoting to beauty, Unilever can pass those inflationary supply chain costs onto the consumer much more easily without destroying their sales volume.
Wow. We're also seeing companies look for efficiency by just shedding weight entirely. Like
Wow.
FedEx beat Q3 estimates, hitting 5.25 in earnings per share on $24 billion in revenue, and they are moving forward with spinning off FedEx Freight by June 1st just to streamline operations.
Everyone is looking for a leaner operation.
Yeah. But perhaps the biggest structural shift we saw in the corporate sector involves the banks. U.S. regulators just proposed easing large bank capital requirements by nearly 5%.
Which is highly controversial.
Yeah, Fed Governor Barr actually dissented on this, raising questions about the resilience of giants like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan. Now, to a layperson, 5% doesn't sound like a massive shift. How does this actually change the mechanics of the banking sector?
Well, in the world of institutional banking, a 5% reduction in capital requirements unlocks billions and billions of dollars.
Really? Just from 5%?
Yeah, because those requirements dictate how much cash a bank must keep frozen in reserve against its loans and investments as a safety net.
Oh, okay.
So by lowering that threshold, regulators are freeing up massive amounts of liquidity. In a high interest rate environment where the broader economy is straining, banks are desperate for that liquidity so they can continue lending and generating returns.
But then why the dissent from Governor Barr?
Because it's a tightrope walk. Governor Barr's dissent highlights the danger here. You are lubricating the economy by letting banks lend more freely. But if another macro shock hits, say, the energy crisis worsens even more, do those banks still have enough padding to survive a wave of defaults?
Oh, I see. It's basically trading systemic safety for immediate liquidity.
Exactly.
But speaking of unlocking capital, the biggest pivot we're seeing across all these briefs isn't just about surviving inflation. It's about securing the ultimate competitive edge. And that is artificial intelligence.
The AI gold rush.
The reallocation of resources here is staggering. Meta is officially killing Horizon Worlds in VR on June 15th. They are straight up abandoning their namesake metaverse bet to focus on mobile and a broader shift toward AI.
And if you think about the mechanics of that decision inside a boardroom,
Yeah.
the metaverse was this massive capital sink with a highly theoretical decades-long return horizon. In a high-interest rate environment like we have right now, you simply cannot fund theoreticals.
Because money isn't free anymore.
Right. Artificial intelligence, however, is increasingly viewed as an immediate existential mandate. You either integrate AI efficiency now, or you're priced out of the market by next year.
And it's not just Meta. Alibaba slashed its workforce by a massive 34% for 2025. They missed their Q4 revenue, and now they're just doubling down on an AI and cloud push, complete with major price hikes to fund it.
The desperation for efficiency is everywhere.
It really is. Even billionaires are going DIY. Our sources noted Mark Cuban is reportedly using an Apple Mac Mini to run AI locally just to auto-unsubscribe from his spam emails.
That's amazing.
I just have to laugh at the image of using a dedicated, highly capable piece of hardware just to aggressively manage your inbox.
It's a humorous anecdote for sure, but it perfectly illustrates the micro level of this trend, you know?
Yeah.
From multinational conglomerates restructuring their entire workforce, all the way down to an individual reclaiming their time, compute power is the universal tool being applied to reduce friction.
But the scramble for that hardware has a pretty dark side. We always talk about AI as if it's just software floating in the cloud somewhere. But it is physically constrained by hardware, specifically NVIDIA chips.
Highly specialized physical assets.
And the desperation for that hardware has created a massive black market. The DOJ just indicted Supermicro or SMCI co-founder Wally Laya and two others. They allegedly diverted roughly $2.5 billion worth of U.S.-made NVIDIA AI servers to China.
Completely violating export controls.
Yes, and, I keep hearing the phrase, AI is the new oil, but looking at the smuggling ring, moving $2.5 billion in servers feels fundamentally different than smuggling a barrel of crude.
It is fundamentally different, and that distinction is crucial. A barrel of oil is a consumable, right? Yeah. You burn it once to generate power, and then it's gone.
Right.
A cluster of NVIDIA GPUs is capital equipment. Once you plug it in, it provides ongoing compute power that allows you to train models, which then compound your industrial, economic, and even military advantages for years.
Wow.
That is why export controls on these physical servers are the most aggressive geopolitical weapon we have right now. You cannot build the digital future without the physical refined fuel of these chips.
So it's a massive national security issue.
Exactly. The fact that billions of dollars of hardware are allegedly being diverted just highlights that physical, localized constraints are dictating the global balance of power.
Just a quick quirky aside while we're in the weeds of tech and DC politics here. Polymarket's pop-up news and data bar in Washington, D.C., which they called the Situation Room, just got a cease and desist from a PR firm called Global Situation Room.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Even the branding around data processing is highly contested right now. But getting back to this idea of compute power, AI requires an unprecedented amount of electricity.
Massive amounts.
And we just spent the first part of this deep dive outlining how terrestrial energy grids are choking. So, what do the tech giants do when they run out of power on Earth? They look up.
To orbit.
Yes, they are looking to an entirely new frontier to build their data centers space.
And this is where corporate strategy bleeds into what previously sounded like pure science fiction.
It really does.
They are trying to bypass terrestrial limits entirely.
The scale of this is wild. According to the filings, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin filed FCC plans for Project Sunrise. This is a mega constellation of up to 51,600 satellites specifically designed to provide in-space AI compute, launching on their new Glenn rockets.
Incredible.
And rival SpaceX is defending its own plan for a 1 million satellite orbital data center. They're promising phased deployment and studying atmospheric impacts while fighting off objections. My question is, how does putting 1 million servers in a vacuum actually solve our data problems down here on Earth?
Well, it solves a massive earthly bottleneck, which is grid power, but it introduces fascinating physical engineering challenges.
How so?
On Earth, data centers use millions of gallons of water and massive HVAC systems to keep chips from melting.
Right.
In space, you bypass the terrestrial utility companies entirely because you can harness solar energy directly 247 without any atmospheric interference blocking the sun.
Okay, so infinite power, but what about the heat?
That's the catch.
Mm.
Cooling in space is actually complex because it's a vacuum. You can't just use fans to blow hot air away because there's no air.
Oh, right.
You have to use massive thermal radiators to bleed the heat directly out into the cold of space.
Mm.
But by moving the processing off-world, you are escaping the physical limits of local energy grids that are currently struggling just to keep the lights on.
But think about the physical friction that creates. I mean, SpaceX is having to study atmospheric impacts for a reason. When 1 million satellites eventually degrade and have to burn up in the atmosphere, what does that do to our climate?
It's a huge unknown.
And you can't just send an IT guy up in a van to swap a bad hard drive. It feels like we're just trading an earthly power bottleneck for a low Earth orbit logistics bottleneck.
That is exactly the trade-off. But the fact that companies are willing to invest billions of dollars to overcome the gravity well of Earth just to plug in more servers, it shows you exactly how desperate the need for unconstrained compute power has become.
It's mind-bending to think about millions of servers processing data in orbit. But we have to bring this deep dive back down to the literal ground, because the exact same theme of hitting physical limits that we are seeing on the global highway and the power grid is playing out inside our own bodies and literally on our front porches.
Yeah, the physical infrastructure of everyday human life is experiencing the exact same friction.
Let's talk about health and consumerism. Novo Nordisk's Wegovy HD just won FDA approval. It's a much higher 7.2 milligram dose that is showing about a 21% average weight loss over 72 months.
That's a huge jump in efficacy.
It is, and it launches in April to directly fight Eli Lilly's Zepbound. But at the exact same time, our sources highlight how the quote-unquote protein trend is accelerating.
Right, in the food industry.
Yeah, Starbucks and packaged food makers are just pumping their items full of protein to attract health-conscious buyers. But physicians are urgently cautioning against these protein-washed, ultra-processed foods, advising people to go back to whole food sources.
Because it's a marketing gimmick.
Exactly. We have food scientists engineering ultra-processed foods on one end, and pharmaceutical scientists engineering a 7.2 milligram injection to fix what the processed food does to us on the other.
Yeah, it's basically this perfect closed loop of consumption.
It's wild.
Food manufacturers know consumers are desperate for health benefits, so they use chemical engineering to isolate a nutrient like protein and inject it into highly processed, high-margin junk food.
Right.
But human biology doesn't process isolated nutrients the same way it processes a whole food, like a piece of fish or a handful of almonds. The body sort of rebels against the processing.
So it backfires.
Exactly. So the consumer buys food, marketed as healthy, experiences negative metabolic outcomes, and then turns to pharmaceutical interventions like Wegovy to correct the biological damage.
And speaking of the fragility in what we put in our bodies, there was a stark reminder of supply chain quality control this week. Taro Pharma had to recall nearly 90,000 bottles of children's ibuprofen.
Which is terrifying for parents.
It was an FDA Class 2 recall. And for context, a Class 2 recall means exposure could cause temporary or medically reversible adverse health consequences. They literally found a gel-like mass and black-form particles in the liquid medication.
It's a breakdown in the physical system. When supply chains are stressed by energy costs and inflation, quality control often faces incredible pressure.
Which brings us to perhaps the most glaring, everyday physical bottleneck we saw in the briefs. The U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah.
The USPS formally warned it could run out of cash within 12 months without congressional relief. They are literally putting the reduction of delivery days on the table just to survive.
And the contrast here is really the defining feature of our current economy.
What do you mean?
We have billionaires conceptualizing instantaneous AI compute via million satellite constellations in orbit.
Yeah.
While the fundamental mechanism for delivering a physical letter or a prescription or a package to a citizen's home is on the verge of financial collapse.
Wow. That puts it in perspective.
A reduction in mail delivery days creates a very real, tangible bottleneck for small businesses and just everyday logistics.
So let's quickly recap the massive ground we've covered today for everyone listening. We started at the physical choke points of the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz bottlenecking 20 million barrels of oil, leading to market slides and soaring 6.5% mortgages. We watch corporations scramble for leverage, with Nexstar buying up TV stations and Unilever pivoting from food to high-margin beauty products just to survive the inflation. We saw the desperate scramble for AI hardware leading to a $2.5 billion NVIDIA chip smuggling ring.
And the space race.
Yes, we looked up to see Blue Origin and SpaceX trying to escape earthly power grids by building solar-powered data centers in space. And then we ended right at your front door looking at the biological paradox of weight loss drugs and ultra-processed foods and a postal service that might not be able to afford to deliver your mail every day.
It is a profound juxtaposition and leads to a final thought I think is worth exploring for you long after this discussion ends.
Lay it on us.
Today we looked at a world experiencing incredible, very real physical bottlenecks. Energy shortages, microchip export controls, stress biology, and mail delivery constraints. Yet, simultaneously, we're trying to build limitless, boundless infrastructure in space and in artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
The question this raises is, as our digital lives become increasingly boundless and placed in orbit, will our physical lives become more strictly rationed and bottlenecked here on Earth?
That is a fascinating paradox to leave off on. Are we building a limitless digital future while simply accepting a permanent traffic jam in our physical reality? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you. Keep looking for the underlying mechanisms connecting the headlines. And, the next time you're sitting in a dead-stop traffic jam on the highway, just remember, at least you aren't trying to route 20 million barrels of oil through it. We'll catch you next time.